Hey everyone, welcome back. Seriously, wherever you are tuning in from right now, I hope you're feeling healthy, energized, and ready to dive into something fascinating. Sending you all my very best wishes. Stay well, stay positive, and take good care of yourselves. Okay, today we're tackling a concept that sounds super science-y, but is actually the absolute heartbeat of our planet, the carbon cycle. You hear about carbon all the time, carbon emissions, carbon footprint, carbon dioxide, but what is it really and why does it cycle? Forget complicated graphs and jargon. We're going to break this down together. Imagine carbon atoms as tiny, super energetic travelers, constantly on the move, changing outfits and playing essential roles in everything from the trees outside your window to the air you breathe, and even that cup of coffee you might be sipping. Understanding this cycle is key to grasping how life works, how our climate functions, and honestly, how we fit into the bigger picture. So, let's follow these carbon atoms on their incredible journey. First things first, what is carbon? Think of it as one of the fundamental building blocks of life. It's a chemical element, like oxygen or iron, but it has this superpower. It loves to link up with other atoms to form incredibly diverse molecules. The sugar fueling your morning run? Loaded with carbon. The wood in your desk? Packed with carbon. The fat in your body? Yep, carbon. The plastic in your phone case? Carbon again. Even the carbon dioxide gas, CO2, you breathe out? That's carbon combined with oxygen. Carbon is literally the backbone of all living things, plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and it's a major player in rocks, oceans, and the air itself. It's incredibly versatile and absolutely everywhere. But here's the crucial part. Carbon isn't static. It doesn't just sit there. It's constantly moving, flowing, and transforming between different places on Earth and different forms. This continuous movement and transformation is what we call the carbon cycle. It's nature's grand recycling system, ensuring this essential element is available for life, over and over again, across millions of years. So, where do we find carbon hanging out? Picture it stored in big reservoirs or pools. The biggest long-term storage locker is actually rocks and sediments, like limestone or chalk, formed over millions of years from the shells and skeletons of ancient sea creatures. This carbon is locked away tightly and moves incredibly slowly. We're talking geological timescales. Then there's the ocean, which holds a massive amount of carbon, way more than the atmosphere. Some of it is dissolved CO2 gas in the surface water, but a huge chunk is stored deeper down as dissolved inorganic carbon or even buried in ocean sediments. Fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, are another huge reservoir. These are essentially the concentrated, ancient remains of plants and algae that lived millions of years ago, buried underground before they could fully decompose. Their carbon has been locked away for ages. Above ground, we have the living things themselves, all the plants, animals, fungi, and microbes, which are essentially packages of organic carbon. Finally, there's the atmosphere, where carbon exists primarily as carbon dioxide, CO2, and, to a much smaller extent, methane, CH4. This atmospheric carbon pool is relatively small compared to the ocean or rocks, but it's incredibly dynamic and vital because it directly influences our climate and is readily available for plants to use. The cycle is all about how carbon moves between these different pools: the atmosphere, the ocean, the land, living things in soil, and the deep geological stores. Let's start the journey with the air we breathe. Carbon dioxide, CO2, is constantly present in our atmosphere. It's a natural and essential gas. Here's where the magic begins for life on land: photosynthesis. Plants, algae, and some bacteria are the masters of this process. They act like nature's solar-powered carbon vacuum cleaners. Using sunlight as their energy source, they suck in CO2 from the air through tiny pores in their leaves or surfaces. Inside their cells, they perform an incredible chemical trick. They combine that CO2 with water, H2O, drawn up from their roots. Using the sun's energy, they break apart the water and CO2 molecules and reassemble the atoms into brand new molecules, simple sugars like glucose, C6H12O6. This is food for the plant. Crucially, oxygen, O2, is released as a waste product, the oxygen we breathe. So, the carbon atom that was once part of a gas molecule floating freely in the air is now captured and built into the solid structure of a leaf, a stem, a root, or a piece of fruit. The plant uses this sugar for energy to grow, build its body, and reproduce. In this way, plants and other photosynthesizers are constantly pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it into living tissue. This is the primary entry point for carbon into the food web on land. What happens to that carbon once it's inside the plant? Well, plants get eaten. A grasshopper munches on a leaf, incorporating the plant's carbon, now part of proteins, sugars, fats, into its own body. A bird then catches and eats the grasshopper, moving that carbon into the bird. A fox might catch the bird, transferring the carbon again. At every step, when any living thing, plant, grasshopper, bird, fox, or even a decomposing fungus, needs energy, it performs respiration. This is essentially the opposite of photosynthesis, though it happens in plants too. Inside cells, oxygen is used to break down food molecules, like sugars. This releases the stored chemical energy the organism needs to move, grow, repair itself, and stay alive. The key chemical reaction? Sugar, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, O2, carbon dioxide, CO2, plus water, H2O plus energy. So, through respiration, that carbon atom that was captured by the plant and passed up the food chain is released back into the atmosphere as CO2. This is a constant daily cycling. Plants pull CO2 in, all living things breathe CO2 out. It's a fast, natural exchange. But not all carbon takes the fast lane back to the air. When plants and animals die, or when leaves fall, or animals poop, that organic material doesn't just vanish. This is where nature's incredible cleanup crew, the decomposers, step in. Bacteria, fungi, earthworms, insects, they get to work breaking down this dead stuff and waste. They consume it, respire some of the carbon back to the atmosphere as CO2, just like we do when we eat, but crucially, they also transform a significant portion of it into soil organic matter. This is that dark, crumbly, rich stuff in healthy soil, humus. Think of it as partially decomposed plant and animal material. It's packed with carbon. This carbon can stay locked in the soil for decades, centuries, or even millennia, depending on conditions. It's a major carbon storage bank. Decomposers are vital recyclers, returning nutrients to the soil for new plants to use, but they also act as a crucial break in the cycle, slowing down the return of carbon to the atmosphere. Now let's dive into the ocean, the planet's largest active carbon sink. The surface layer of the ocean is in constant conversation with the atmosphere. CO2 gas dissolves directly into the seawater, like bubbles dissolving in a soda. This happens faster where the water is colder. Once dissolved, this CO2 reacts with water molecules to form carbonic acid, H2CO3, which then breaks down into bicarbonate, HCO3, and carbonate, CO3-2 ions. It's a bit like the ocean taking a deep breath of atmospheric CO2. Marine plants, especially microscopic phytoplankton, floating algae, perform photosynthesis just like land plants. They use dissolved CO2, or bicarbonate, and sunlight to build their bodies, pulling carbon out of the surface water. They form the base of the entire ocean food web. Zooplankton, tiny animals, eat the phytoplankton. Fish eat the zooplankton. Bigger fish eat smaller fish, and so on. At every level, respiration happens, releasing CO2 back into the water. When marine organisms die, their bodies and waste sink. Some of this marine snow gets consumed by creatures on the way down who respire CO2, but a significant portion reaches the deep ocean. There, cold temperatures and high pressure allow dissolved carbon, as bicarbonate and carbonate, to stay put for a very long time, centuries or more. Some carbon also gets buried in ocean sediments, eventually forming new rock layers over geological time, locking carbon away for millions of years. The ocean acts like a massive sponge, absorbing huge amounts of atmospheric CO2, but it also slowly releases some back to the atmosphere, especially in warmer regions. This exchange between the ocean surface and the atmosphere is another massive part of the natural carbon cycle. For hundreds of millions of years, the carbon cycle was a relatively balanced system, governed by natural processes like volcanic eruptions, which release CO2 from deep within the earth, weathering of rocks, which slowly absorbed CO2, photosynthesis, respiration, and ocean exchange. Carbon moved between pools, but the overall concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere stayed within a range that supported life as we know it, creating a stable climate. However, humans have become a major geological force, disrupting this ancient balance in a very short time. This is the critical part we need to understand. Our main intervention? Burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. Remember, these are vast reservoirs of carbon that were locked away underground for hundreds of millions of years. When we dig them up and burn them for energy in power plants, cars, factories, homes, we are essentially performing respiration super fast, but on a colossal scale. We're combining that ancient carbon with oxygen, releasing massive amounts of CO2 back into the atmosphere, carbon that hasn't been part of the active cycle for eons. It's like opening a massive, ancient carbon vault and dumping its contents into the air all at once. Our second major disruption is deforestation and large-scale land use change. When we clear vast forests for agriculture, logging, or development, we're doing two destructive things simultaneously. First, we're killing the trees, the powerful carbon vacuum cleaners that were actively pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Fewer trees mean less carbon being naturally absorbed. Second, and often more drastically, we're disturbing the soil. Clearing land often involves burning, releasing stored carbon in trees and plants as CO2 immediately, and tilling or exposing the soil. The rich soil organic matter, that carbon stored by decomposers over centuries, is suddenly exposed to oxygen. Microbes decompose it much faster, releasing huge amounts of CO2 and sometimes methane into the atmosphere. It's like draining a carbon bank account that took millennia to build. So, we've dramatically increased the amount of carbon entering the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and destroying forests/soils, while simultaneously weakening the planet's ability to remove carbon from the atmosphere by killing forests and degrading soils. This double whammy has thrown the natural carbon cycle wildly out of balance. What's the consequence of this imbalance? The extra carbon dioxide we're pumping into the atmosphere acts like a thick blanket wrapped around the Earth. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Here's how it works. Sunlight, mostly visible light, passes through the atmosphere and warms the Earth's surface. The warm Earth then radiates heat energy back upwards, but this energy is in the form of infrared radiation, heat waves. Greenhouse gases like CO2, methane, and water vapor are transparent to incoming sunlight, but absorb and trap this outgoing infrared heat. They don't trap it forever. They eventually re-radiate it in all directions, including back towards the Earth's surface. This natural greenhouse effect is essential. Without it, Earth would be a frozen ball of ice. But here's the problem. When we add extra greenhouse gases, especially CO2, we thicken that blanket. More heat gets trapped near the surface. The result? Global warming. The entire planet heats up. This is climate change. The signs are everywhere. Rising average temperatures, melting glaciers and ice caps, rising sea levels from meltwater and the expansion of warming seawater, more intense heat waves, droughts, floods, and stronger storms. The planet's climate system is fundamentally changing because we've overloaded the atmosphere with carbon that was supposed to stay locked away. The ocean, our great carbon sink, is also suffering directly from absorbing so much of our excess CO2. Remember how dissolved CO2 forms carbonic acid? When the ocean absorbs massive amounts of extra CO2 from the atmosphere, it becomes more acidic, a process called ocean acidification. This increasing acidity makes it harder and takes more energy for marine creatures like corals, oysters, clams, mussels, sea urchins, starfish, and many types of plankton to build and maintain their shells and skeletons made of calcium carbonate. In very acidic conditions, their shells can even begin to dissolve. This threatens entire marine ecosystems, especially coral reefs, which are biodiversity hotspots. The base of the ocean food web, plankton, is also at risk, which could have catastrophic effects on fisheries and marine life globally. So, the ocean is heroically absorbing our carbon pollution, but it's paying a heavy price. How does the disrupted carbon cycle affect ecosystems on land? It's complex and far-reaching. Plants need CO2 for photosynthesis, so you might think more CO2 would be like plant food, leading to a global greening. And to some extent, under controlled conditions with enough water and nutrients, plants can grow faster with higher CO2. This is called the CO2 fertilization effect. But in the real world, it's not that simple. Climate change itself brings higher temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, more droughts, and more intense heat waves, all of which can stress plants and negate any benefit from extra CO2. Weeds and invasive plants might actually benefit more than desirable crops or native plants. Furthermore, climate change disrupts the delicate timing in nature phenology. Flowers might bloom before their pollinators emerge. Migratory birds might arrive after the insect peak they rely on to feed their chicks. These mismatches can ripple through food webs. Warmer temperatures also allow pests and diseases to spread to new areas where native plants and animals have no defenses. Overall, while some plants might get a temporary boost, the chaotic effects of climate change driven by the carbon cycle imbalance are causing widespread stress, disrupting habitats, and contributing to species loss. The big question is, what can we do? How do we help restore balance to the carbon cycle? The solutions lie in tackling both sides of the problem, drastically reducing the amount of extra carbon we add to the atmosphere and enhancing the natural ways the Earth removes carbon. First and foremost, we need a massive global shift away from burning fossil fuels. This means transitioning to clean, renewable energy sources like solar, wind, geothermal, and hydropower as fast as humanly possible. It means making our homes, buildings, industries, and transportation, cars, trucks, ships, planes, vastly more energy efficient. Every bit of energy we save is carbon we don't emit. It also involves electrifying everything we can and powering that electricity with renewables. Secondly, we need to stop deforestation and actually start reforesting and restoring ecosystems on a grand scale. Protecting existing forests, especially ancient tropical rainforests, which are massive carbon storehouses and biodiversity sanctuaries, is critical. Planting billions of trees in the right places with native species helps absorb CO2 as they grow. Restoring degraded lands, wetlands, like peat bogs, which store immense amounts of carbon, and coastal ecosystems, like mangroves and seagrass meadows, which are incredible carbon sinks, is equally vital. This is often called natural climate solutions. Thirdly, we need to revolutionize how we manage agriculture and soil. Practices like regenerative agriculture focus on keeping the soil covered, with cover crops, minimizing tillage, which disturb soil carbon, planting diverse crops, and integrating livestock carefully. These methods help build soil organic matter back up, pulling carbon out of the air and storing it underground where it improves soil health, water retention, and fertility. It's a win-win. Reducing food waste is also crucial. All the energy and carbon emissions used to produce wasted food is completely unnecessary. Emerging technologies like carbon capture and storage, CCS, aim to capture CO2 emissions directly from large sources like power plants or factories before they hit the atmosphere, and then pump it deep underground for permanent storage. While promising, these technologies are complex, expensive, and shouldn't distract from the urgent need to stop emitting in the first place. Direct air capture, DAC, which sucks CO2 directly out of the ambient air, is also being developed but requires enormous amounts of clean energy to be truly beneficial. These technologies might play a supporting role, but nature-based solutions are currently more scalable and provide huge co-benefits for biodiversity and human well-being. What can you do as an individual? Your choices matter and collectively make a huge difference. Reduce your energy consumption. Turn off lights and electronics. Use energy-efficient appliances. Insulate your home. Adjust your thermostat. Choose renewable energy. Opt for a green energy supplier if possible, or consider solar panels. Rethink transportation. Walk, bike, use public transport, carpool, and if buying a car, choose electric or the most efficient model possible. Eat for the planet. Reduce meat consumption, especially beef and lamb, which have high carbon footprints. Choose local and seasonal produce when you can, and minimize food waste. Consume less, waste less. Buy only what you need. Choose durable goods. Repair instead of replace. Avoid single-use plastics. Support sustainable businesses. Patronize companies committed to reducing their carbon footprint and protecting nature. Be a soil champion. If you garden, compost your food scraps and yard waste. Avoid synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. Use mulch and plant trees. Use your voice. Talk to friends and family about climate change and the carbon cycle. Support organizations working on climate solutions. Most importantly, vote. Vote for leaders at every level who take the climate crisis seriously and support policies for rapid decarbonization, renewable energy, forest protection, and sustainable agriculture. Demand action. The carbon cycle is the fundamental biogeochemical cycle that makes life on Earth possible. It's the continuous journey of carbon atoms, from the air to plants, through food webs, into soils and oceans, and back to the air, driven by natural processes like photosynthesis, respiration, decomposition, and ocean exchange. For millennia, this cycle maintained a delicate balance, regulating Earth's climate and sustaining ecosystems. But human activities, primarily burning fossil fuels and destroying forests, have overloaded the atmosphere with carbon dioxide at an unprecedented rate, disrupting this ancient balance. This excess CO2 acts as a heat-trapping blanket, causing global warming and climate change, with devastating consequences like extreme weather, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and ecosystem disruption. Restoring balance requires an urgent, global transformation, rapidly phasing out fossil fuels, embracing renewable energy, protecting and restoring forests and natural ecosystems, and adopting sustainable land and agricultural practices. It's a monumental challenge, but understanding the carbon cycle empowers us to see the connections, grasp the urgency, and recognize the solutions. We are part of this cycle. Our choices directly impact its flow. By choosing to reduce our carbon footprint and support systemic change, we become part of the solution, working towards a stable climate and a healthy planet for generations to come. Thanks so much for taking the time to learn about this crucial planetary process. Wishing you all health, happiness, and the energy to make a difference. Take care, and I'll see you next time.